In this video series about how to teach remotely, I'm going to be showcasing free educational tools as well as showing complete lesson plans that you can use with your students when teaching them online. In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about how to podcast with your students remotely. We'll start with teaching students about the basics of podcasting, then go over how to plan and prepare for creating a podcast. After that, we'll look at how to use Soundtrap to record and edit audio. And then we'll look at some of the other components like creating a title, description, and thumbnail graphic for a student podcast. And lastly, I'm going to show you some different publication options for you to showcase your students' work. If you find the tips that I share in this video helpful, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button, share it with other teachers that you know, and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any of my weekly updates. In this video, I'm going to show you a fully self-contained week-long project that I created using a Google Slides hyperdoc. You can visit my website at www.newedtechclassroom.com in order to download all the resources that I share in this video and use them for yourself. The main program I'm going to teach you in this video is Soundtrap for Education. Soundtrap is currently offering a 120-day free subscription to teachers. I'll also include the link to Soundtrap on my website and in the video description below for you to be able to access your free account. Let's start by talking about why I think podcasting is a really great project for remote learning. Making a sudden shift to teaching students online is going to be incredibly difficult, and it's going to be even harder to find ways to keep students engaged in rigorous project-based learning where they're still able to feel part of a class community. If you have your students create a podcast, not only will they be practicing rigorous academic skills, they'll also be learning important 21st century skills, and they'll be participating in a really cool art project that pertains to this historical moment we're in and will hopefully help them feel part of a broader community. As far as equipment goes, the only thing your students are going to need is a laptop. If they also have a smartphone, that can be beneficial if they want to do mobile interviewing, but it isn't necessary. So now let's jump in and take a look at the entire lesson plan that's going to walk students from the place of potentially not even knowing what a podcast is all the way through publication. As I mentioned in the beginning, I anticipate this lesson taking about 1 week to complete. On this slide, you'll notice that I've included all the different learning targets students will be touching on in this project. First, they'll be learning about the basic elements of a podcast. Then they'll be planning and composing a podcast episode. Next, they will record and edit a podcast episode using Soundtrap. Then they're going to create a title, description, and graphic for their podcast. And lastly, they'll be publishing their podcast for their class, for the rest of the school, or beyond. It's really up to you and your students where you take it from there. Normally, when I do a podcasting project with students or with the podcasting club that I run at my school, I allow students to choose the topic, and I think that that is totally okay if that's the route you want to go. For this particular lesson plan, I've chosen to create a podcasting topic around the essential question of how COVID-19 has impacted our students, their families, and their community. The reason I chose this topic is because we are currently living in an extraordinary historical moment. And I think it's really important for students to reflect on how that moment is impacting them as well as others around them. For step 1, students are going to engage their prior knowledge and write directly on this slide what they already know about a podcast. Then students are going to explore different podcasts in order to identify what they noticed about the different elements of a podcast. Here I've included a hyperlink to NPR's website, which has some great examples of podcasts that your students could listen to get a sense of what podcasting is all about. After they listen to a couple snippets of podcasts, they're going to write in their own words how they would describe a podcast. Next, students are going to watch some different StoryCorps videos in order to get a little bit better understanding of what telling a more intimate portrayal or perspective about your life would look like. I've also included a link to a recent podcast that was just published by KQED featuring high school students talking about their experience living through the COVID-19 pandemic. Having students listen to this podcast will give them an even greater sense of what they would be recording themselves when they complete this assignment. Here I'm showing you the graphic organizer that I would use if I hadn't already pre-selected a topic for my student. You'll notice under topic that I already pre-wrote the topic that my students are going to do. At this point, it's totally up to you whether you keep that topic, whether you want to make it more open-ended for your students to choose, or whether or not you want to assign them a totally different topic. Students will first record what they already know about that topic. Then, if it's relevant, they can do some research on Google to go learn some more information about the topic that they're going to be creating a podcast episode about. And next, they're going to work on writing a specific focus question that's going to be the centerpiece of their podcast. Again, here you can see that I actually have pre-written the focus question for my students because I really want them to focus on how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted their lives as well as their families and their communities around them. For the next step, planning and composing a podcast episode, I've adapted some ideas from KQED's guide for how to write a perspective. For the lead or intro, students are either going to start with a joke, an interesting fact, a mystery, or a quote. Then for the scene, students are going to focus on showing rather than telling and use descriptive language to describe a scene. At this point, they might want to include dialogue as well as additional descriptive language to really bring to life their personal experience of this unique historical moment. For the argument section, students will be focusing on what message they want to convey. So here they might step back a little bit from their own personal experience and think a little bit bigger picture about how their experience relates to something bigger that's going on in the world around them. Lastly, in the conclusion section, students will wrap up their podcast episode either with a funny anecdote or an important statement about their personal life or the world around them. For the tag, students will sign off stating who they are. And as you can see in my example, I'm also including where I came from. This could be a point in the lesson where it would be appropriate to jump in and provide students with some feedback. The last part of the planning phase will have students think intentionally about how to get the best quality audio recording. I've included a link to Tom Gibson's video here about how to optimize audio if you're recording on a smartphone. If students are not using a smartphone, but instead are using a computer to record audio, it's just important that they are in as quiet a room as possible and that they speak relatively closely to the microphone on their computer. Because the actual podcast recording is going to be a small performance, it's a good idea to have students think about when and where they're going to record their podcast episode. For step 3, students are going to learn the basics of how to record and edit a podcast episode using Soundtrap. I've included a link to a crash course on Soundtrap that students can watch in order to learn the major features of how to use the program, as well as the link to Soundtrap. If you're interested in learning all the ins and outs of how to set up Soundtrap, how to sync it to Google Classroom, I recommend that you check out my other video on getting started podcasting with students using Soundtrap because I cover all the nuts and bolts in that other tutorial. So let's jump in now and look at the Soundtrap Studio so you can understand how students will record their podcasts as well as edit them. And luckily, it's really easy to do. Once students are logged in, they're going to click Enter Studio. Once inside the studio, they'll have the option to record a podcast. The first thing students will want to do is give their podcast a basic title. Once students are ready to record, they'll go to Add New Track, select Voice and Microphones. Here you'll want to have them do the volume check to make sure that the audio recording is being done correctly. And then when they're ready to record, they simply click Start Recording. After the recording is finished, students will see their recording show up as a layer in the studio. One of the greatest features of Soundtrap is the Transcribe Voice Tracks feature. When you click on Transcribe Voice Tracks, it's going to populate a transcription of the entire audio file that was just recorded. This is useful for show notes, but it's even more dynamic than that. The first thing students will want to do is edit the transcription for any errors. Soundtrap's using artificial intelligence and it's really quite good, but of course, it's going to have a few errors in it. The way that you fix an error is by dragging over the text, right-clicking, selecting text correction, and then fixing your text from there. The most important way, however, that students are going to use the transcription function is to use it to directly edit the audio. If there's a section of their recording that they want to get rid of, all they have to do is highlight that portion of the text, double-click, and then select Cut Audio. You'll notice in the audio layer above that a segment of the layer has also been cut out, indicating that that section of the recording is now gone. Then students will go up to the music icon on the top right in order to select different loops that they can use for interlude music. Here, students can search from different types of sounds. So because my podcast episode features a young dog that's always distracting me from my work, I'm going to pick a barking dog sound to include at the beginning of my podcast. And then I can also find some music that I want to start my podcast with. And when I'm ready to bring that music and those sounds into my podcast, all I need to do is drag them over into the studio and place them where I want them to go. Notice how I'm moving the audio file forward so that my podcast episode begins with sounds and music and is then going to lead into my audio recording. In order to duck the sound so that the sound fades away as my vocal track kicks in, all you need to do is drag the corner of the sound layer, and that will fade the sound into the vocal track. So let's take a quick listen to what that would sound like. The toilet paper is running low, and so is the canned soup. The dog won't stop chewing my slippers. You'll also notice here that the length of my final podcast is around 2.5 minutes, which is really a perfect length for a short episode like this. You probably don't want them to last any more than about 5. When they're ready to finish up, students will want to make sure that they have clicked the blue save button, and then they can exit to the studio. In order to download the file off of Soundtrap, all students will need to do is select the 3 dots, scroll down to download, and select MP3. For this step, students are going to go back to their transcription and copy and paste the final draft of their transcription into the Google Slides HyperDoc. For the 4th step of this project, students are going to create a title for their podcast episode, a short description, and then create some artwork that showcases what they just made. Here, I've included a hyperlink to an article about how to think strategically about composing a title for your podcast. The next link is for the same article, which also includes information about how to write a brief description for a podcast episode that you just recorded. Once students have read that article, they're going to compose a draft of their title as well as their description. This would be another point of the lesson where you might want to jump in and provide students with some direct feedback. You could also host a midweek Q&A session via Zoom in order to answer some specific questions your students might have at this stage of the project. The last piece before publication is going to be to create a thumbnail graphic that represents the podcast that they just recorded. Here I've included a link to Claudio Zavala Jr.'s video about how to make a YouTube thumbnail using one of my absolutely favorite programs, Adobe Spark Post. I'll show you right now the basics of how to use Adobe Spark Post so that you also feel comfortable with it. Adobe Spark is free to use, but if you haven't set up an account, it will put a watermark on the graphic that you've created, and some of the templates and images are not available to use. Luckily, Adobe Spark Post is actually free for schools to use. Your school just needs to sign up and go through a few steps. But it's also totally okay just to use the completely free version. So to create a YouTube thumbnail, you'll go up to Create a Project, scroll down to View All, select YouTube Thumbnail Graphic, see More in order to see some of the different templates that are available. And I'm going to go ahead and pick one of these free templates that's available for me to use. If I decide I don't want that template, I can always choose from another one of the options on the right-hand side. To edit the text, simply double-click on the text and type the title of the podcast episode. On the right-hand side, there's a menu where you can modify the color of the text. You can change the font type. You can add different background shapes to the back of the text. There are also different text effects that you can use. And a tool I really appreciate is the style tool because it's going to give you some different options for how to stylize your graphic. And then to change the background image, simply select the image, click replace, and there you can search for free images from Pixabay or Unsplash, or you can upload an image on your own. You can see that the sky's the limit here for graphic creation, but it's also okay to do something that's relatively simple and straightforward. To access the graphic, go to the top right-hand side of the screen, select download, choose the file type that you want, and you'll see that it shows up in your downloads folder. Then when students are back on their Google slide, all they'll need to do is click insert and then find the image that they just created. For the final piece, they're going to be publishing their podcast. And what that really means is that they're going to be turning the assignment into you, and then you're going to take care of the publication as their teacher. In order to access the graphic and the audio file that students created, by far the easiest thing to do is have them send you an email with those files in it. Once they've sent you an email with those files, all you'll need to do is download them onto your computer and then upload them into Google Drive. It'll be important that you right-click on the file and make sure that link sharing is turned on. Now for the last part, I'm going to show you how you can publish the work that your students just created for others to be able to see. As you can imagine, there are lots of different options for how to publish a podcast. Given the complexities of different privacy issues, I think one of the best ways to publish the students' work is by quickly setting up a class webpage. I'm going to be creating another tutorial later just on the topic of how to set up a web page, but I'm also going to show you right now how incredibly easy it is to do. To set up the web page, all you need to do is go to Google Sites, select Create, choose to create the website in New Sites rather than Classic, and there you're taken to a basic web page template. I'm just going to show you how to set up a single page where you can post all the work that your students just created. Start by changing the title of the web page. All you need to do is select the text and edit it to be what you want it to be. Then you can customize a little bit by clicking Change Image and select an image from your computer or one that's already available on Google Sites. Then you can choose from any of these layouts. Simply select the layout and drag it onto your web page. And there you'll see there's a place for you to add an image as well as some text. To add an image file, simply click the Add button. If you didn't upload the image to your drive, you can simply select it from your computer, or you can find it in your Drive folder. Then you can copy and paste the title and description that your student sent you. In this case, since the graphic already has the title and the author on it, I'm just going to copy the description of the episode. Lastly, you'll need to embed the audio file onto the web page. In order to do that, return to the audio file you uploaded into Google Drive, right-click on the file and select Get Shareable Link. Make sure you've copied the link, click on Embed, and then paste the link in. Click Insert, and you'll see that an audio file has been created. Now the size is going to be too big, so you're going to need to scale it down a little bit so that it fits. And there you have it. Now you've put the podcast episode on the website. And when you're ready to add more, simply add a new layout and upload new files in. When you're ready to publish the site, click on the Publish button, and there you'll see you're given some different options for who would be able to view your site. So you could change the share settings here, for example, so that only specific students you invite are able to see the website, or you could open it up to just be available to students in your school. You could also make the website available for anyone to view. And there you have it. You can see here what an example of a published website with podcast episodes would look like, and you can hit play in order to listen to the podcast episode. I think it's really important during remote learning to figure out different ways to showcase work, and creating a quick web page to publish your student podcast is a great way to do it. Thank you so much for watching my video to the end. If you found the tips that I shared helpful, please share it with other teachers that you know, hit the like button, and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any of my weekly updates. You can also check out some of the other tutorials I have on my channel by clicking on one of those 2 videos above. And if you're interested in downloading any of the resources that I've created and show on my videos, please visit my website at www.newedtechclassroom.com. Lastly, if you want to check me out on social media, my Twitter handle, Facebook page, and Pinterest account are all in the description below. Thanks so much and have a great week.